Hello, and welcome to another edition of Atlas Information Live. We're your host, Attlas Alex, and today we are going to be taking another step in the direction of facing reality, facing the facts. Over the past few weeks, this seems to have been a theme that has been once again naturally and organically unfolding, where we talked about facing our demons, and then last week we focused on facing fear. And in the process of this exploration of what does it precisely mean to face our demons, our vices, the adversary, our egos, whether it's fear or any other ego that we face. And last week we took a stance. We took a stand. And we suggested how important it is to face our demons, particularly fear, with a lightness and not give them more power by falling into the trap of heaviness or being drawn down into the mire with them. In other words, looking at our defects and vices, our shadow self, if you will, not with this dire, apocalyptic, heavy, judgmental, hopeless. We're trying to find the words that convey how, when we look at our dark side, we can have this tendency to be dragged down into the darkness. And we can look at our defects and vices, our bad habits, our addictions, etc. We can look at them and become overwhelmed and feel hopeless and helpless at times. And so, as you recall, particularly in our discussion of fear, we describe fear as the great chameleon, and we use the character of Rango, that animated character, to sort of lighten up or belittle or see that ego of fear for what it is. And it's not this overwhelming monstrosity that holds sway over us. And this is sort of where we had to be, where we were last week, and we wanted very much to convey the essence of the expression to dance with the devil. That it's a dance that we have with our dark side. And we were bringing into the discussion the Tao and how the light and the dark are essential in the dance and the creation of experience and the creation of wisdom and knowledge. It is this friction, the adversarial tension between the light and the dark, the affirming and the negating, the masculine and the feminine, the positive and the negative. There are all sorts of different ways, and we were exploring this last week. We also promised that this week we would have a PowerPoint elaborating all of this. So that's just a little bit of background on what brought us to this point. And the point where we are at is the adversary decided to assert itself over the last week. We have in the past tried to emphasize that whenever we make some progress, or whenever we feel as though we've made progress against our egos, in reference to our darkness, our dark side, we feel that we've reached a new level, or we've overcome some defect or vice to some capacity. We have mentioned how we cannot afford to be complacent. We cannot afford to be naive. We must prepare ourselves for the fact that egos do not go quietly into the night. To use the chess analogy, your opponent doesn't stop playing just because you made a good move. You may have advanced your strategy. You may have taken one of their pieces. You may have gained some superior position on the board, or what you believe is a superior position on the board. But the adversary doesn't stop playing just because of that. And when you comprehend that the adversary that you're playing is not human, it's mechanical, it's a machine. It's like the AI that runs a chess computer. All it knows is that it's at risk. It's in jeopardy. And it will do whatever it takes to reassert its dominance over the board. And in a very real, practical, metaphysical sense, the board is us. The board is you. What holds sway over your thoughts, over your emotions, over your sensations, over your actions, your reactions, your behavior, in other words? What has dominance over your human machine? And this past week, we were reminded that any entity of mechanical nature, particularly an entity of fear, fear is the primal survival instinct. Fear fears. So any type of advance that we think that we're making against that particular adversary, its reaction is going to be proportional to whatever advance that we have made against it. if not even disproportionate. Because as we all know, fear tends to overreact. All you have to do is observe yourself and any phobias that you have, or ask anybody with stage fright what happens to them before they step out in front of an audience. Or ask anybody who suffers from panic attacks, or again, a phobia, and they encounter the object or the subject of their phobia. Or anybody who suffers from anxiety, that looming, lingering, anxious feeling because that entity of fear is raging in their subconscious mind. And what radiates to the surface is this toxic anxiety, this looming, disconcerting sense of insecurity in oneself and one's life. And one's anxious about everything. One is consistently, constantly just anxious, just in a state of subconscious fear. And whatever radiates to the surface, into the consciousness, pervades and saturates and filters our entire experience. In our case, we don't experience our fear doesn't result in anxiety, but it does result in depression, because fear very quickly and easily turns to anger. And that's because in our case, it's not so much that we are afraid. Our fear likes to control and be in control. And when one loses control or one's control is challenged or one's control is taken away, that very quickly turns into fear, into anger. And depression is subconscious anger. So when it became clear over the course of last weekend and our live stream, and we made such a bold assertion how we were not going to be controlled, and we were not going to be, allowing ourselves to fall into heaviness and so on and so forth. Suffice it to say, the entity of fear inside of us did not take kindly to any of this. And it reacted as one might expect it would. But it did so in its typical cowardly way in our subconscious mind. And we were put into a state, whatever depressed state we were in coming in to last week's live stream, come Monday, we were just dragged down that much further. And that malignant arthritis that we've been suffering from, it got worse and went into both of our shoulders. We were completely drained of all of our energy. We were unable to exercise. We're unable to do anything of any productivity whatsoever. And we were just dragged into a new low, to a whole new level, to a whole new depths of depression. And it was just in time for, today's live stream, that we were just in this state all week. And we had absolutely no opportunity to work on anything, to prepare anything. We were just completely taken out. We couldn't meditate. We couldn't do anything. And it was as if that entity was explicitly making the point of reminding us of how far we have yet to go, and asserting its power and its influence over us, its ability to to exert control. And it's ironic that it does so through depression by raging that it has no control. So it will get control however it can. And if how it gets what it wants, which is our energy and our attention, our consciousness, that is, it will do so by having throwing a temper tantrum, essentially. But throwing a temper tantrum in a place that's beyond our access, beyond our ability to reach directly, consciously. It's in our subconscious. So, as you recall, last week we even had a seizure during the live stream, which is the first time that has happened, to the best of our recollection. And we did, in fact, go back and watch it. It was the first time we had ever seen ourselves having a seizure on video, because of course we don't go around videotaping ourselves under normal circumstances. And it is more than likely that the entity that's responsible for our seizures, you see, it's a coward. It's a terrorist. It's fear. It does not want us to be able to see it. That's why it afflicts us the way it does. Even as we're having seizures, it does not want to be seen. And the depression it causes, we are subject to the superficial symptoms. But it's not like we have any sorts of thoughts or feelings about not being in control or being afraid or anything like that. No, it's or even being angry, for that matter. Ask anyone who suffers from depression. They're not angry on the surface. They might have reasons to be angry, but they don't feel that anger on the surface. They're just being drained from within. Be drained of all their motivation, their energy. So perhaps seeing ourselves having a seizure, being able to witness that, also triggered the entity to have this fit of rage. Also, our response to the fact that we had a seizure, the fact that we knew that we had a seizure, which was also new. A lot of this that unfolded and how it unfolded last Sunday seems to have had a direct effect and impact on the entity itself and threw it into this rage. And as a result, we've been suffering ever since. And it has been exerting its influence over us ever since. So why should we spend all of this time talking about this with you and sharing this with you? For a number of reasons. First of all, we do this whole live stream. We called it Attlas in formation for a reason. To allow you to have a window into the process of someone walking the path of the Bodhisattva, which is a path of suffering and sacrifice for others. We do this to let you bear witness to the challenges that can face us on the path. Now, does that mean you're going to have seizures? No, obviously not. But that aspect gives you an insight into some of the severity that goes along with a path of true spirituality and the suffering that goes along with it. And how, no, it is not an easy journey. It is not an easy process. We can talk about dancing with the devil all we want, and we can talk about having a lightness about it, and we can do that all we want, but we mustn't allow our perspective to color or make us naive or complacent. We must not underestimate the adversary. The adversary is not dancing with us. Okay, so we can approach it with a sense of allowing, with a sense of necessity, with a sense of, yes, I chose this, or I took on this burden, or this is my burden, and I don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill. Dancing with the devil, you can use whatever, we dare say, tricks or tactics that you have to keep yourself light and try to keep yourself above it all and try to keep your vibration high and not get dragged down into the mire. And that's fair. But at no point should we allow ourselves to forget what we're dealing with here. Our adversary is our opponent. They may not be our enemy, they're just an opponent. But on the board, their pieces are ruthless. Their pieces are ruthless. We may say that we're playing a game of chess, and that's fine. We're playing a game. But the game has consequences. And winning the game is important. And one doesn't win the game merely by dancing and prancing and thinking positively, or trying to outwit, or to be more clever and try to stay above it all, right? At the end of the day, the control of the board is still at stake, the control of yourself. And the reason why, we have to comprehend the reason why we're trying to remain light and not allow ourselves to get bogged down in it. And that is because that's just a trick of ego to get us to take ourselves too seriously, because that's the pendulum swinging too far the other way. And this is what brings us to the just being an observation of it. The allowing part, the accepting part, has more of a neutrality to it. But recognizing the intensity for what it is, and what's causing it, what's behind it. And also accepting the reality and allowing for the reality that if you land a blow against your egos, they fight back. If you deny the egos what they desire, what they demand, they do not take kindly to that. They do not throw their arms up and say, oh, well, okay, I guess, They don't go off into a corner and sulk. They plan, they prepare. And what are they preparing for? They're preparing for their opportunity to strike back, to fight back. And they do fight back. And surely, if we are in observation of ourselves, we should know this. If you have dealt with any kind of what comes to mind is like an addiction or a weakness of some sort, or if you have tried to lose weight, for example, if you have an issue with eating, perhaps, or perhaps drinking, or any other type of vice, smoking, whatever the case may be, or you've tried to get in shape, you've tried to begin an exercise program, or whatever it is. The reason why we use these types of examples is because they're very often the most universal. We all have these some kind of little foible or addiction or something of that nature, something that we've tried to give up many times perhaps, and we just can't. We just keep going back to it, or we find it very difficult. Perhaps you've tried to lose weight, as an example. Over the past week, we have gained back probably 2 pounds, 3 pounds in the past week. It's ridiculous. And the reason why is because we've been binging. We've been binging specifically on ice cream. And we admit that. It's a pattern that we've fallen into the past, in the past, and it's usually only when we're in the most severe cases of depression that we find ourselves essentially medicating ourselves on ice cream. There are probably worse things in the world to medicate oneself with, but if you believe what the neuroscientists say, sugar is as addictive, if not more addictive, than heroin. So maybe it's not a good thing to self-medicate with. But at the moment, at least, it's ice cream just kept showing up at the house, and we were just in that state where we just had to. And it was a situation where we just had to allow ourselves. We had to give ourselves that. It was a situation where what were we going to do? It's like you have to throw the thing a bone somehow. It's like it's like letting your opponent take this pawn. It's like sacrificing a pawn in a chess game, or sacrificing a knight or a bishop. A friend of ours talks about this book, Steppenwolf, which I guess it literally means walking with the wolf. But it's like every now and then you have to throw it a bone, because if you don't, the thing will consume you. Right? So there has to be a way. Like, there are a lot worse ways. And if there is no give and take, and this is part of that dancing that we talk about, there has to be a give and take. It's not all just one way on the alm of life. You have your down points. You have the points where you're coming out of hell and you get to another level. But guess what? At that other level, there's only one way to go from the top, and that's back down into hell. And the hell that you go back down into is deeper, it's harder than it was before. We have to prepare ourselves for that. We have to be prepared, and we have to be prepared to allow ourselves to be in that hell and experience that hell. We can't resist it. We can't fight it, because we're actually resisting the process of the Alm of life. This is a very subtle, a very difficult thing to grasp, to accept, and certainly to master, because the mind and mystic pride comes up and immediately starts with the self-judgment and condemnation. And this is what makes things much, much, much worse than they have to be. Because the reality is, anytime we have a victory, anytime we overcome any demon, any ego, or an entity that we face at a certain level, and we return, and we've now returned a little stronger, a little more wise, a little more experienced, a little more capable, a little more whatever. We've returned at a higher level. Well, again, there's only one way, there's only one direction we can go. This is Jacob's ladder. It's the law of the pendulum. It's the law of the waves. What goes up must come down. And when we come down, we go into that deeper level. We must face our egos. We must face our psychological hell, our shadow. But that shadow is going to be stronger, more clever, more insidious than it ever has been before. Why? Because we're now facing it at a different level, at our level. We always face it at our level, but if we've gone up a level, that means it has leveled up. And so this can be very shocking and very jarring, and it can be very disconcerting, and most of all, it can be very disheartening, because it can make us feel like we're starting all over again from zero, from ground zero. It's like somebody who is the number one batter in the amateur league, or sorry, in the minor league. We got to get our terminology correct. Imagine having the best, what do they call it, an RBI? The best batting average in the minor league, or being the best pitcher in the minor league, and then being selected to get to go to the majors. And your first game in the major leagues, you were the best batter in the minor leagues, but you get to go, you graduate to the major leagues, and what happens? In your very first game, you strike out 3 times. You don't hit the ball once. Or you were the number one pitcher in the minor leagues, and you get drafted and you get to go to the major league, and you don't strike out anybody as a pitcher, and everybody keeps hitting fly balls and home runs, No matter what you try to throw at them, they have no problem knocking it out of the park. That's what it feels like every time we make a revolution on the Alm of Life. When we advance from the level that we were at to a whole new level. It's like going from the minor leagues to the major leagues, and all of a sudden now we're facing the adversary at a whole different level. It's a whole new ball game. That's what this past week has felt for us. And yeah, we were flatly, unequivocally debilitated. We were beaten, defeated. And all the wonderful things that we were talking about last week, it was like we were made to feel completely defeated and hypocritical, actually, because we felt like we were saying one thing and doing the opposite. And the risk of this is allowing mystic pride to bubble up and become mystic shame. Because remember, pride and shame are the same ego. And especially for someone in our position who do these talks once a week and purport to share a great deal of wisdom and knowledge for the sake of others, for the sake of helping them along their journey. And others rely on us. Like even just this morning, someone contacted us on Facebook Messenger asking us for advice. And we are mystic pride and specifically shame, guilt, and self-judgment and condemnation, and that feeling of hypocrisy. We're particularly vulnerable to that because of the position that we have been told to assume, that we assume in our life. Because we feel in moments such as this past week, like we feel totally and completely unqualified to be doing what we're doing. And yet, ironically, if we can set all of that aside, if you can set that aside and set mystic pride aside and say, okay, we recognize that, there it is. There's that belief or thought. And come back and say, yes, but how often do people get to experience someone on the spiritual path who shares with them not just the highs, but the lows? And how often do people get to experience someone on a spiritual journey who is completely transparent and completely open? A lot of the discourse around spirituality and the spiritual journey is all very up here and positive and in the clouds and in the rainbows. And we know this. And the reality is the Alm of Life is equal and balanced like the Tao. It's 50% spent in hell. There's no getting around this. There's no avoiding this. Whatever it is that you're dealing with, it might not be seizures, it might not be full-blown clinical depression, but it's something. We all face something. However our fear comes into our life, with anxiety, with insecurity, with panic attacks, with you know being unsure of ourselves, or then there's pride or shame or anger or our own gluttony or laziness. There are countless, envy, greed, lust. We have all of these potential egos that we're facing. It's not just, what I'm facing. You're facing something. And that something is not going to go quietly into the night. And it's not going to be a case where you're going around the alm of life and it's just victory after victory after victory after victory, and you never experience any lows anymore. This is not the case. And perhaps we don't emphasize that enough, because it's something that, perhaps because of fear, perhaps we don't want to turn people off. We don't want to strike fear into anybody's hearts, but really perhaps we're just afraid of people being turned away from the teachings, of being turned away from these talks, because we're being frank with them. Well, guess what? Over between last Sunday and this Sunday and the week in between, there's no avoiding it, there's no hiding it. I had no choice. I could only be and show you and share with you what we've been going through. Anything else would have been dishonest. Anything else would have been a lie. And you don't come here for lies. You come here for the truth, the unvarnished truth. And so if what we're going through can be of benefit to you, this is the benefit it can be for you. That we cannot afford to go through this process with these rose-colored glasses. And we cannot afford to let ourselves fall into either trap, because both are traps. The pendulum swinging too far to one side, where it's all rainbows and unicorns and love and light and dancing with the devil and everything's just lightness and allowing and blah blah blah, and it's just right. Or swinging too far to the left, where it's all darkness and demons are these terrible monsters that are overwhelming, and they're overpowering, and they're out to destroy us, and all, what I mean, like the doom and gloom, in other words. So you have the rainbows and unicorns, love and light, positivity extreme, and then you have the doom and gloom, it's the end of the world, it's the end of our life, extremity over here. Somewhere in between, there's a balance. And maintaining that balance and maintaining that equanimity, that state of pure observation and a state of pure allowing. So if you do feel anxiety, if you do feel depression, if you do feel sadness, or if you do feel lustful or envious or greedy or lazy or whatever the case may be, that you're able to observe that with equanimity. And you don't try out of cleverness to tap dance your way out of the situation, but you also, out of defeatism, allow yourself to indulge in the darkness and get sucked down into it, into a pit. And that, at least for the last week, for better or for worse, were we right? I don't know. Was I right to allow myself to binge one too many times on ice cream throughout the week and medicate myself on ice cream? Was that the right thing to do? I don't know. But it's the thing that I allowed myself to do, and I didn't show much resistance to it. I allowed myself to be in that state of depression. And I allowed myself to observe myself in that state. And I gave myself a week of just a little holiday from everything and allowed myself to be in hell. And guess what? When you're in hell, nothing beats, nothing beats a pint of ice cream when you're in hell. For better or for worse. Right? And I'd much rather, have a week of eating too much ice cream than turning to alcohol, or turning to, God forbid, some other drug. Because I know myself, and I've been here before. I've been in this state before, just maybe not so severe, not so deep, because again, different levels, right? But at the same time, I know that under normal circumstances, I don't have cravings to eat ice cream that way. I don't indulge ice cream that way. So I know that it's not me. And at the same time, I know it's something I had to do. It's very strange, and it's a subtle thing. And it's not something that we're here prescribing by any stretch of the imagination. All we know is that there are aspects of us that want to beat us up over it, that want to judge and condemn over it. And this is how subtle and insidious the egos are. So this is turning out to be a very again, it's probably not what anybody expected today, and it's certainly not what we planned on last week. But life happens, right? We don't get to choose how the path unfolds for us. But our Divine Mother gives us that which we need. That subsistence and that sustenance. It's interesting because there's a word related to the changing of water into wine and the creation of the Eucharist, or the unction, which is the host, right? The breaking of the bread at the Last Supper, where Jesus said, "This is my body, and which will be given up for you, and this is my blood. It will be shed for you and for all, so that sins may be forgiven. Do this in memory of me." That's how it's spoken during the Catholic Mass, anyway. But the transformation of bread into the Holy Unction, or the Eucharist, the word is called transubstantiation. And there's a lot of meaning in that word, but the substantiation part, to the transubstantiation, it's the transformation of substance into a higher form, a higher vibration, or a higher phenomenon. But the substantiation part, the Eucharist, the unction, is still eaten. The subsistence, the sustenance, that which we need, is delivered to us by our Divine Mother. And on the spiritual path, all of our suffering is related to that. all the suffering of our physical body, of our mental body, of our emotional body, and the entities, the egos that are responsible for causing that suffering. They contain the substance, the sustenance, the subsistence that must be transmuted. It's related to that transubstantiation, where bread becomes the body of Christ. Well, in a very real sense, we have the raising of the Kundalini uniting with the Holy Spirit, and the alchemical transmutation of lead into gold, the lead of ego into the gold of the human soul. This is a form of transubstantiation. We call it transmutation, the alchemical process. And that process is a process of psychological death. Because to transmute something into something else means the original thing ceases to be what it was. The egos do not take kindly to this process. Our egos do not sit idly by while we undertake this grand alchemical enterprise of transmuting lead into gold. Lead likes being led. The law of inertia applies across mechanical nature. Things like to keep on doing what they are already doing. And egos, they like their racket. You think of it like any mob movie you've ever seen, right? The mafia or organized crime, it has a racket. And that racket produces for them what they want, what they desire. So anybody that has a racket, an ongoing racket, they don't want to stop. And they do not just, lay down at the first sign of intervention by the authorities, let's say. And neither do our egos. And as we've used many times in the past, the example of video games or Dungeons and Dragons, the leveling up your character, and then you go deeper into the dungeon. And so the higher your character becomes, the deeper into the dungeons you go, and that the higher level the opponents you face, the bigger the bosses, the more minions they have, etc., etc. And this is just a case of living through that and experiencing that, and just sharing that with all of you as a reminder. Don't be surprised, and don't allow yourselves to be sucked into the guilt or the shame of feeling like you're starting all over from scratch, simply because you're now facing your demons at a whole different level than you were before. What comes to mind is that song. What's that song? Is it The Birds? There is a season, turn, 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 and a time for everything under heaven. That's actually a quote from the Bible. If there's a time for everything under heaven, there's a time to be weak. There's a time to be defeated. There's no point in pretending otherwise. And there's no point in expecting ourselves to always go in one direction. The alm of life, Jacob's ladder, whatever you want to call it, it's by definition, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Because we on that spiral path, there is no way to advance on the alm of life, and except by descending and facing new challenges that are more difficult than we have ever faced before. And it's going to feel overwhelming each and every time we face those challenges at a whole new level. And that's okay. We have to be able to allow for that and accept it. Tiffany says, as a general rule, and out of reverence for the divine, if we find ourselves dancing with our Satan, we should be keeping our mouths shut when guiding others, unless we are seriously doing the great work. She says, I apply this to myself every time and in every situation. Is that a comment as to whether or not we should be even talking about this, Tiffany? We're certainly not keeping our mouths shut in this case. It's yeah, so there it is. And she goes, I love talking about this. It's something that maybe you've had different experiences. And she goes, there's a fine line. It has to be done with being genuine. Well, maybe you've had different experiences, but in our experience, we don't see or hear enough so-called gurus or people talking about spirituality. Like, people talk about, your guardian angel and your spirit guides and this and that and the other thing. People talk about all of that as if it's common knowledge, and that these people, they're always there to help you and so on and this and that and the other thing. But because it doesn't sell any books, and because it doesn't sell any talks, and it doesn't sell any courses, and it doesn't sell any retreats, the actual spiritual work, the so-called shadow work, the work on the egos, self-observation, and everything else that we talk about and everything else that we share about, the actual alm of life, which is the meta paradigm behind all processes of to be or not to be, all forms of evolution and devolution, are bound within this one single paradigm, the meta paradigm of all paradigms. We find it grossly lacking, and people are only focused on really this fantasy, imaginary uh, journey. And we're this kind of canary in the coal mine because the entity that we deal with is fear, and that is the primal survival instinct. And genuine spirituality is psychological death. It's unbecoming what we believe we are, what we think we are, what we've come to identify with and attach ourselves to, in order that who we truly are can manifest and express. And so it just makes sense that our adversary would react to that process in the strongest possible terms and in the strongest possible way. And it's also a sobering reminder that I, the mere mortal here, speaking these words, right? I'm not the one who's in control of that process. And that the entity that wants to be in control of me likewise wants total control. The very notion, the very idea that it is not in control will set it into these fits, into these tantrums. And that is a sobering reminder of the nature of the work. And, when our real work begins, if you will, like our real life's work, and who is truly going to be doing that life's work, and who isn't qualified to do that work. And all of this has been coming to light over the last, well, certainly the last few weeks, but especially this past week. It was a reminder of just how unprepared we are, and how much more work we have to do. So hopefully, if it's a sobering reminder to us, then hopefully you can benefit from such a sobering reminder as well. Tiffany says, screw the adversary. Of course it wants to control. Up until now, it's allowed. On some levels, sovereignty is a powerful tool. The key, of course, is to be aware of the adversary and its ways. I mean, you don't defeat your opponent in chess by dismissing them or belittling them or taking them for granted. You defeat your opponent in chess by assuming they're at least as good at the game as you are. If you underestimate your opponent in any way in chess, you're going to get defeated. So it's better to assume that they're better at the game than you are. And assume that they know better the tactics and strategies. Because one thing is for certain, that your opponent is more relentless than you are, because you have to be conscious. You have to remain conscious to do the work. But your adversary does not. Your adversary acts and reacts automatically, mechanically. They just do. Whereas you have to be. It is worthwhile meditating on that. In order for you to defeat the adversary, you must be. And in order for your adversary to get the upper hand over you, all it has to do is do. Benjamin says, damn that alm of life and its gravitational pull. Well, you know, while you're in it, while you're in hell, obviously, it's a very unpleasant place to be. But once you're able to accept and allow yourself to be in hell, and you observe yourself in hell, and you observe what's happening, this is the first step in the alm of life, to just observe and not judge and not condemn. So once the initial shock, if you will, or the unpleasantness, the pain, whatever it is, that the disruption, the inconvenience, the unpleasantness, once you can get over that, it's like you acclimatize yourself. And once you acclimatize yourself, you can then really begin doing the work. Now, how long it takes to acclimatize, that depends on you. And this, it doesn't have to be that much of a system shock, or maybe we made it worse on ourselves. Or maybe it's just that we're at a level where it's just, that's how bad it had to be. But one thing is for sure, is that we allowed ourselves to be there. And we didn't try to force anything, and we didn't try to resist anything. We just allowed what needed to play out. And maybe we needed to do that in part to be able to share all of this with you. And maybe we needed to do that for other reasons. But once you realize that, once you settle into the being there and saying, okay, we're in hell, and we're in hell again. Now, what is it that we have to face? Well, clearly we have to face our demons. So once you settle into that mode again, there's only one direction you can go. And how readily you get out of your current predicament depends on how open you are, and how perceptive, and how observant you are. And once you get over the initial shock and the initial unpleasantness, and you allow and accept your present predicament, then it does lighten up. You do become, again, more acclimatized to it again. And the initial shock wears off, and you're like, yeah, this is a very familiar place. I know what it's like to be here. I've been here before. I've been here many times, in fact. Maybe not this deep, but that's just comes with the territory. If I've gone deeper than I ever have before, it's because I've been prepared for this depth. And I must put my faith and trust in myself that I'm prepared for this depth. Tiffany says, I have meditated on that. I was given the jewel of sovereignty. It has to be known at some point on our journey because there's very pure energy within it. And by given a jewel, my sovereignty wasn't just given to me. No, it was merely a breadcrumb to follow. There's two things that strike us about these comments, Tiffany. Number one, we're curious to know what you mean by sovereignty. Do you mean free will? Just curious. So, as we mentioned last week, and Tiffany responds here. She says, not free will, no. Okay. But she says, although that is one of the unexpected gifts that can come with that. So suffice it to say, last week we mentioned that this week it's our birthday today, and we have family coming over. So we in any case we won't be able to go more than 2 hours. So we haven't even gone. We've just barely gone over an hour and 15 minutes roughly. So, but we wanted to give you all a chance to ask questions or make comments or anything else. We really have nothing really to say other than share with you where we've been this past week and where we are now. And we don't want to just keep repeating ourselves over and over and over again. So we don't see any reason to drag things out if unnecessarily, but we want everyone to they want to ask questions or share or by all means feel free to do so. It's a strange thing. Archer says, "Don't blow out any candles." He says, "Don't." So he says, "You're light." No, we asked not to have cake. So we said, just whatever you do, we don't care what, just no cake. Because if they make a cake, nobody likes cake anymore. Nobody eats cake anymore. And if they bring a cake, then I'm going to end up having to eat the whole damn thing myself over the week. And I don't want to do that. Right? Besides, I've eaten way too much ice cream this past week. So it's like hopefully tomorrow I'll have the energy to start doing some exercise again, get back into my regular routine. But who knows? Tiffany says, like to wish you a happy birthday. Thank you, Tiffany. And she says, hugs and light. Thank you. Appreciate that. What a strange gift to be giving people on our birthday, right? Strange gift. Here, let me share with you our suffering and misery. But it's necessary. Uh, it's not going to sell us any books, and it's not going to not going to get us any speaking engagements, or get us on any podcasts or whatever. But it's necessary. I don't think enough people appreciate certainly what the path of the bodhisattva is, and what it entails, and what the spiritual work and so-called shadow work really entails. And people don't appreciate. And if they don't know, they don't appreciate it, it's because they haven't really done the work. But if you ask someone who faces an addiction of some kind, if you ask them, especially someone who's overcome their addiction or in the process of overcoming their addiction, ask them. They know. They'll tell you that addiction does not go away without a fight. And that many alcoholics, they have to live the rest of their life not being able to take a single drink. They live the rest of their lives on the edge of a cliff. And that if they fall off that cliff, they know exactly where they're going. They're going right back down into the depths of hell that they may have spent years getting out of, climbing out of. And perhaps they haven't really gotten to the root of the problem, which is the self-loathing that was behind their addiction. But most of them will acknowledge that their addiction is a demon of some kind. And they will look at it in those terms. Even if they're an atheist, they'll look at it in those terms. They know that something that's desperately trying to get a hold over them. And when you consider that self-loathing, and that it's a sobering thought, pardon the pun, but it's worthwhile to consider. And it's worthwhile to, next time you're facing something in your own life where clearly you're facing the demon, whatever it is that you face, and you're facing it, perhaps it feels like you're facing it for the first time. There's no, was it Master Samael who said, he described the work as requiring super efforts. The hardest thing we can tell you is carrying the weight of such statements while one's depressed and one has no energy to do anything and one can't meditate. Because we cannot meditate when we're like this. We can try, and we can try to do pranayama and get nowhere. Imagine trying to do pranayama and you can get nowhere because you have no energy to work with. It's like, it's just a place where we have to let ourselves be there when we're there. And if we brood over these facts, it's like mystic pride comes in, and mystic pride turns into mystic shame. And then that's just a downward spiral. It just gets worse and worse and worse and worse. So but it is what it is, and just in time for our birthday. So um, we don't want to dwell on it, and then we don't really have anything else to say. We don't have anything else to share. We're not in the best of places right now. That's for sure. But we did want to at least give you what we could in accordance with our tradition. On our birthday, we always try to do something for others. And if all we can give you is our suffering and our example, then that was our job today, and that was our opportunity. So, if anybody has any questions or comments, then feel free to give you a minute or two if you want to type those. But other than that, I think we'll call it a day because there's really nothing else for us to say at the moment. And we have to try to psych ourselves up somehow because family is coming soon, and we have to try to make like we're in a good mood and make like we're actually in a celebratory mood, which we're not. We would just as soon have no one coming over today, but you know what family is like. They've planned it. Everybody's planned it. People are already on their way, blah, blah, blah. So it is what it is. But it would be so much better if we could just cancel everything and just have some time to ourselves. But Tiffany says, no questions. Thank you for sharing today. Do enjoy your day. Find something that's beautiful and allow yourself to enjoy that. Well, thank you, Tiffany. We will certainly do our best. We'll certainly do our best. All right, then we want to thank you all for turning up today and putting up with us. And we hope next Sunday things will be different. Things will be back to normal. In the meantime, we hope you have a good week. And take care of yourself. Take care of those you love. And as always, we want to wish you and those you care about inferential peace. Take care, everyone. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.